Thank you for being with us today, and we wish you a very fruitful event. Welcome to our World Heritage 2021 debate. 2021 debate is a year of events focused on protection, conservation, and management of World Heritage. We want to uncover untold stories to broaden our views on heritage practices and future perspectives. Knowledge gathered this year will be published in 2022 on the occasion of the 50th anniversary of the Convention. The Our World Heritage Initiative is created by individuals working on 100% voluntary capacity. We would like to point out that Our World Heritage provides an open dialogue platform that is based on voluntary work of session organizers and speakers. Our World Heritage welcomes diverse viewpoints in the spirit of collegial debate where mutual respect is afforded to all. Please note that the expressed views do not necessarily reflect the official position of Our World Heritage. We thank today's speakers for telling their stories, and we thank you, the listeners, for your kind interest and questions. If you want to remain up to date on our activities, you can follow our social media. We maintain channels in multiple languages to break through the language barriers and connect to local communities. You will find all links on our website, ourworldheritage.org. Thank you for being with us today, and we wish you a very fruitful event. Welcome to our World Heritage 2021 debate. 2021 debate is a year of events focused on protection, conservation, and management of World Heritage. We want to uncover untold stories to broaden our views on heritage practices and future perspectives. Knowledge gathered this year will be published in 2022 on the occasion of the 50th anniversary of the Convention. The Our World Heritage Initiative is created by individuals working on 100% voluntary capacity. We would like to point out that Our World Heritage provides an open dialogue platform that is based on voluntary work of session organizers and speakers. Our World Heritage welcomes diverse viewpoints in the spirit of collegial debate where mutual respect is afforded to all. Please note that the expressed views do not necessarily reflect the official position of Our World Heritage. We thank today's speakers for telling their stories, and we thank you, the listeners, for your kind interest and questions. If you want to remain up to date on our activities, you can follow our social media. We maintain channels in multiple languages to break through the language barriers and connect to local communities. You will find all links on our website, ourworldheritage.org. Thank you for being with us today, and we wish you a very fruitful event. Welcome to our World Heritage 2021 debate. 2021 debate is a year of events focused on protection, conservation, and management of World Heritage. We want to uncover untold stories to broaden our views on heritage practices and future perspectives. Knowledge gathered this year will be published in 2022 on the occasion of the 50th anniversary of the Convention. The Our World Heritage Initiative is created by individuals working on 100% voluntary capacity. We would like to point out that Our World Heritage provides an open dialogue platform that is based on voluntary work of session organizers and speakers. Our World Heritage welcomes diverse viewpoints in the spirit of collegial debate where mutual respect is afforded to all. Please note that the expressed views do not necessarily reflect the official position of Our World Heritage. We thank today's speakers for telling their stories, and we thank you, the listeners, for your kind interest and questions. If you want to remain up to date on our activities, you can follow our social media. We maintain channels in multiple languages to break through the language barriers and connect to local communities. You will find all links on our website, ourworldheritage.org. Thank you for being with us today, and we wish you a very fruitful event. Welcome to Our World Heritage 2021 debate. 2021 debate is a year of events focused on protection, conservation, and management of world heritage. We want to uncover untold stories to broaden our views on heritage practices and future perspectives. Knowledge gathered this year will be published in 2022 on the occasion of the 50th anniversary of the Convention. The Our World Heritage Initiative is created by individuals working on 100% voluntary capacity. We would like to point out that Our World Heritage provides an open dialogue platform that is based on voluntary work of session organizers and speakers. Our World Heritage welcomes diverse viewpoints in the spirit of collegial debate where mutual respect is afforded to all. Please note that the expressed views do not necessarily reflect the official position of Our World Heritage. We thank today's speakers for telling their stories, and we thank you, the listeners, for your kind interest and questions. If you want to remain up to date on our activities, you can follow our social media. We maintain channels in multiple languages to break through the language barriers and connect to local communities. You will find all links on our website, ourworldheritage.org. Thank you for being with us today, and we wish you a very fruitful event. Welcome to Our World Heritage 2021 debate. 2021 debate is a year of events focused on protection, conservation, and management of world heritage. We want to uncover untold stories to broaden our views on heritage practices and future perspectives. Knowledge gathered this year will be published in 2022 on the occasion of the 50th anniversary of the Convention. The Our World Heritage Initiative is created by individuals working on 100% voluntary capacity. We would like to point out that Our World Heritage provides an open dialogue platform that is based on voluntary work of session organizers and speakers. Our World Heritage welcomes diverse viewpoints in the spirit of collegial debate where mutual respect is afforded to all. Please note that the expressed views do not necessarily reflect the official position of our World Heritage.
Yeah?
Yeah.
Okay. So, hello, my name is Julia Rey, and I am PhD architect at the University of Seville in Spain, and I am here as the coordinator of Session 4, Landscape, Territory, Urban Fabric, Challenge Trends, and the World Heritage Convention. So I'm very happy to be here in this webinar. So I am very grateful that Daniel Pini and Monica Bahia have given me this opportunity, and many thanks to all of you for being here and welcome you. So, well, first of all, it's worth mentioning that the purpose of this session, as reflected in the conceptual note, is to discuss the role of heritage in this urban development situation. So, we know that the 21st century has brought real challenge to contemporary urban planning. Urban contexts vary widely worldwide, from a small settlement to metropolis, from walled and colonial cities to modern ones, and the concentration of population in cities and the speed of their growth to the detriment of rural areas are phenomena highlighted by various world organizations and specialists. This uncontrolled development largely affects cities with heritage elements and values. The willingness to adapt and survive in this situation, which affects the urban landscape and its surrounding territory. However, in the face of this global demand for urban growth, heritage is revealed on the one hand as an option for an improvement in quality of life and well-being, and on the other hand, as a key element of urban economic and social sustainability. Therefore, the aim of this session is to review and discuss the most appropriate heritage strategies for urban development and management in order to solve the challenge facing urban heritage today and incorporate them as a resource for sustainable development. It should also be mentioned that in this line, the recommendation on the history urban landscape has put on the table fundamental keys in heritage management, interdisciplinarity, the citizen as a protagonist in the decision-making process, and heritage valorization developed from a landscape approach. So taking advantage of the 50th anniversary of the launch of the World Heritage Convention, I think it's time to discuss how the new trends in heritage management can favor urban sustainability. Next November, the historic urban landscape recommendation will be 10 years old, which makes it an opportunity to revisit it, to debate implementation difficulties and lessons learned, and to compare it to other approaches and methods that deal with urban heritage in different scales and settings at the global level. Well, after addressing the conceptual note, I would like to introduce the speakers. First of all, Elizabeth Wines. It's an adjunct professor in Hong Kong and Deakin University, and she's from Australia. Her session is titled Urban Heritage Management: Can Our Chosen Historic City Be Retained, Sustained, and Prosper into the Future? So her lecture will deal with the European context of the SDG and the heightened emphasis on the role of cultural heritage in responding to the implementation of the SDGs. Issues as the adaptive reuse or the recommendation on the historic urban landscape will be mentioned. Then Kapila Dharmasena Silva from Sri Lanka, PhD, professor, School of Architecture and Design in the University of Kansas in USA. And his session is titled Conserving History Urban Landscape in the Asia Pacific, Present Challenges and Future Trends. His lecture is mainly focused on the need to implement the whole recommendation as a shared vision among different actors and how this is translated into urban heritage in the Asia Pacific. And to close, we have Francesco Mandarin from Italy, architect and urban planner, specialized in urban conservation, director of the UNESCO World Heritage Center between 2000 and 2010, and Assistant Director General of UNESCO for Culture between 2010 to 2018. And his session is titled Reshaping Urban Conservation. Well, having made this introduction, I shall now give the floor to Elizabeth Vigne with her presentation, Urban Heritage Management, Can Our Chosen History Cities Be Retained, Sustained and Prosper into the Future? So thank you very much, Elizabeth, and anytime.
Thank you very much for that warm welcome. And good evening, good morning, good lunchtime to people from all around the world. It's a thrill to be invited and to participate in this. I will now share my screen and check that you can all see that. Okay? All right. All right. Well, this evening for me and this morning for you, I would like to talk very succinctly, if I can now. Now my PowerPoint is not moving forward. Why is that? I tested it. Here we go. Okay, let's go back. Okay, my presentation in summary will look at how we can sustain our special historic cities and how the Hull model might help us with this. Now, we have been asked by the organisers to fill in a slide like this. I won't go through it except to say that our cities, towns and urban landscapes face many challenges through uncontrolled development, through economic growth, justified by economic growth, and that the need is ever greater for our development to be sustainable. A little bit about me. I'm an architect from Australia working in cities and towns in Australia and Asia, and here I show an example of Broken Hill where I've worked for many years. My projects have involved streetscape rejuvenation projects, adaptive reuse, befores and afters, generally focusing on improving the urban environment, in this case of a rather modest mining town, but moving through to large cities. And as a result of my work, I've written 3 books on the topic. As an architect, I'm very concerned about how our cities and towns and landscapes move into the future. And my most recent book, Streetwise Design, I show you there the link. It's available for free through the Think City website. As an architect, I've been concerned about how new development, and particularly architects, are not responding well to the context in which these buildings are located. And here are some typical examples in Asia, in this case in Yangon in Myanmar, where development is clearly not in the context in which it is located. And similarly here in Penang in Malaysia, you can see the edge of the World Heritage inscription and what could have been Penang without this inscription, with this development showing on the left. Now, it's nearly a decade ago that Ban Ki-moon said in 2012 that our struggle for global sustainability will be won or lost in our cities. And I strongly believe in that. By 2050, we're all very aware now, population will increase up to 70%. So as an architect, I feel beholden that I need to relate to what I do to the urgency of the planet's survival. And the SDGs from 2015, with the goal of 2030 to implement them, that's now only 9 years away. So we've got a lot to do. We're very familiar with these. I won't go through them except to say that I take seriously that Australia is one of the 193 member states who signed up to achieving these goals. In Australia, we see huge problems in goal number 13 in relation to climate action. Our recent, a couple of years ago, bushfires are have a huge toll on our country, and we know that these will continue. This goal also impacts on our young, that they now take days off school to strike, to try and show our generation that they don't want to inherit a destroyed planet. And yet many governments, including mine, are ignoring the urgency of these goals. Number 11, of course, is very relevant to this topic, that we need to look at cities, the issue of affordable housing, transports, how we plan, and how we preserve our cultural and natural heritage. A very important 11.4 introduction into the goals. And we've seen that through voluntary local reviews of cities, that cities themselves, as opposed to countries, have taken the actions in relation to these goals. I think in response to the fact that federal governments, the country leaders haven't done as much as cities want and need. And so that we see these local voluntary reviews, such as recently in Melbourne, a city in my country, which just held in May 2021, a meeting to join as a local voluntary review. Very important to then benchmark themselves against these reviews, so that the SDGs become local responses to a global movement. And of course, with the change in government in the US, where Joe Biden is now supporting the achievement of these goals, and that David Attenborough continues in the background to say simple things like don't waste anything. These goals are now urgent. And it's interesting that in Asia, I've seen, this is in Japan, that these goals in fact exist on notice boards in the countryside. And I think there's actually more understanding in some countries in Asia than in my country in Australia about the local application of these. Now, an example of how to implement the goals at a local level is an example here in the Philippines, where a dilapidated heritage Gabaldon school was in fact proposed for demolition and replacement by a standard school, and that conserving the old building was very similar in cost to this new building, which was very unsustainable, climatically inappropriate, uncomfortable, and consumed energy in a way which is unsustainable. And yet, by advocating for conservation and involving the children in this process, what we're seeing is that goal 4 for education and goal 5 for gender equality, because in this case, young girls championing what it is that they've done in restoring their local school as opposed to demolishing it. So my question is, how can historic towns respond to the urgencies of the SDG framework? We, of course, recognise that every city is unique and it must formulate its own heritage management planning approach. And this process can certainly be helped by the Hull recommendation, now, as has been pointed out, in its 10th year. And I won't go through the various aspects in detail here of the Hull framework, except that I think we're now familiar that it does allow us to integrate and frame urban heritage context, conservation strategies into how we manage cities, and more understanding of the historic layering of the values of that city, to then hopefully come up with a more integrated approach for city management. We've had, to help us, some explanatory brochures along the way, the first one in 2013, supplemented and continued with one in 2016 to help with the practical application of this. And when I look at how we approach heritage management in Australia through our borough charter process, which may be familiar to some of you, this very much aligns with the 6 critical steps as outlined in these early publications of the Hull process. That it is very much important to follow a process of understanding the values of a place and manage those values. So subsequent to these publications, there have been many discussions and meetings held, such as in Shanghai via WITRAP in 2018, where it was proposed to have a look at reviewing of the 6 critical steps and to generally ensure that the input in the application of the whole process to UNESCO in general and the World Heritage Committee in particular. Subsequently, here we have in Beijing another discussion, a meeting. This was pre-COVID when people could actually meet. And then 2020, before this section of the world actually closed down due to COVID, there was a meeting in Japan. And where in this case, the discussion was held around the frailties of a seaside historic town called Tomonuro, and where the process also included a meeting of all the locals to just come and discuss the forward planning of that town and the vulnerabilities of that town. As an outcome of that meeting, the steps were increased to 8 steps here. You can see. However, I don't think the number of steps is that important. I think they are constantly being refined and localised to particular places. Now, in the advent of COVID, we've been able to exchange and have discussions right across the world. And here's just a few of the examples of one where I've been involved, and I know there are many more where the city of Prague, for example, has coordinated one in March, and in May, in the Mediterranean area, there was Living with Heritage meetings. And this has been a very positive development, I think. It makes it very equitable for people to access these discussions rather than actually having to go to a place. And I think that there has been agreement that the Hull approach is an appropriate tool for resilience in historic cities. It's flexible, it's inclusive, it allows for a long-term visionary approach, and it can and must be localised and expanded upon. And we now have this opportunity in the 10th anniversary to have a look about how we can further make this a useful recommendation. And this is just a local context in the city I work with in Broken Hill, where our recent heritage strategy just put up on the web, in fact, references, firstly, the SDGs, the fact that our city signs up to the goals, and also that the heritage framework is very much complemented by the framework of the Hull Landscape Recommendation and our Borough Charter. But in many cities in Australia and Asia, the Hull recommendation isn't yet widely known about. In some cities, it's too late. The question is who can access the knowledge and skills and training for its implementation, and how can it be more resourced and popularised? So I look forward to Kapila Silva, who I understand is going to be discussing this as well in our region. But as I say, a key advantage has been remote meetings like this one, where we've been able to discuss it. So very quickly, I'll take you through the original 6 steps just to replace you. The first step being to undertake comprehensive surveys and mappings of the city's natural, cultural and human resources. And I do like this iceberg diagram showing how we focus so much on what's above the water, the tangible elements, and we mustn't forget the intangible elements, so often unseen underneath the water. Number 2 is to make sure that our planning is participatory and that there is many stakeholder consultation so that all stakeholders are embraced. And we see a good example of that in Ballarat in Australia, which is an early adopter of the Hull approach, in a very imaginative way of mapping their songs and music and cityscapes and history through time. They have a very good website with examples of how they've done this. The third step, of course, is critical to assess the vulnerabilities of a place. If buildings are being demolished, if street vendors and local character is being removed, if there's inappropriate development, these are critical vulnerabilities for our towns and cities. Number 4 is to make sure that urban heritage values are integrated into the wider framework of city development. And a key goal of all of this is, of course, to make cities livable. Cities where transport systems make pedestrianisation easy, and not like this, typical of a North American city. So photographs of these kinds of various cities showing a much more livable approach to how the city streetscape and roadways and footpaths and public spaces and public realm and public domain are shared and equitable. And public gardens and being able to grow food and being able to upgrade parks and share those parks across all members of the communities. And to express the artistic sentiments of the inhabitants of those cities through their public art on streets and enlivening and engaging the public in that. And as an architect, critical is ensuring that there's compatible new development so that this kind of incompatible development in appropriate scale and height, design, materials does not intrude on the townscapes. This is in Canada, in Toronto. The previous one was in Yangon. It happens across the world where this kind of approach to retaining heritage values occurs. And when it is better understood, when the design context is better understood and new development sits comfortably into townscapes, I think this is what we want for our cities. And where creative and even very ambitious projects can achieve adaptive reuse and retrofitting of buildings, such as this one in Penang, where you thought it was completely impossible, and yet where there's a will, there's a way, and in fact that is now the building of the World Heritage Office in Penang. And in Hong Kong, there have been many projects of adaptive reuse of existing former colonial government buildings. Now, number 5, we've dealt with before, but it's to deal with prioritising actions for conservation and development, to urgently implement the SDGs, and to make sure that cities have these spreadsheets as to how they are addressing each of these in all aspects of planning for their city. And number 6 is to establish appropriate partnerships and local management frameworks, and providing incentives and technical know-how on how to conserve and adapt and ensure that these partnerships empower all sections of the community. And I show you an example of January 2020, again, just before lockdown, where in India, there was a design conference which was focused on empowering young women architects and designers with older women mentoring them. And this was a very powerful meeting of over 650 young women. And so sharing model conservation projects, such as this one in Yangon in Myanmar, where showcasing of best practice examples of how to restore and conserve tiled roofs, lime plasters on walls, and how to publicise these. The UNESCO Asia Pacific Heritage Awards, now in the 3rd volume, showcase projects related to achieving the SDG objectives. And these are well worth looking up. They're free on the web, a very good resource. Changing and now moving ahead to the post-COVID opportunities related to our topic. We've seen, I think, an opportunity to look afresh at how our infrastructure systems work, how we can take pressure off our city streets, opening up more bicycle paths. To me, as a fit outdoor Australian, this is so important. Bicycles can be the perfect solution. There's new opportunities in the way we recognise projects. UNESCO in the Asia Pacific Heritage Awards now has a special recognition for a project on sustainable development. There's opportunities to focus on small and medium enterprises, small scale businesses, and that government and local government particularly foster and encourage these kinds of opening up of cities and fostering small scale development, and of course, keeping up with contact tracing and preparation for further outbreaks. And right now in Melbourne, we are just opening up again tomorrow after a 2-week lockdown. So we have to be on the ball all the time. And of course, listening to the ideas of the young, for after all, it is those young people who will inherit the world, and connection of the importance of cities with education. And to finalise, one more quality, I think, post-COVID opportunity. We've seen a lot of kindness, a lot of worldwide kindness brought on by this pandemic. I do hope that we will see that continue in the way that we work and live and raise our families in our cities. So yes, I consider that the Hull approach helps us with tools for resilience for historic cities, and that post-pandemic we can continue to use and broaden this recommendation to include all aspects of human interaction. I believe it's flexible, inclusive, the steps are useful, they can and must be localised, and that like this meeting we can share experiences and report back between our case studies and support each other. And finally, to find champions of the Hull approach is very important in capacity building training, holding workshops for new sites, and promoting the success of Hull case studies, all in operation. So thank you very much.
Well, so thank you very much, Elizabeth. It has been really, really, really interesting. So I think we can talk more calmly in the debate session. So now I give the floor to Kapila Dharmasena with his presentation, Conserving Historic Urban Landscapes in the Asia Pacific, Present Challenge and Future Trends. So anytime, Kapila, anytime.
Thank you very much, Julia. Let me share my screen. Hello, everyone. I'm delighted to be here. And I would like to thank Professor Bandarin, Monica Sheely, and Daniel Pini for inviting me to participate in this Globina series. What I will discuss is about the implementation of UNESCO's 2011 recommendation on the historic urban landscape in the Asia Pacific context, based on the experiences, issues, and prospects of urban conservation in the region after 10 years of its implementation. Now, what I'm providing is a broader overview and not on any specific case study or case studies. Because of that, some of the points that I will mention here may not apply to certain historic cities and towns in the Asia Pacific region. Now, Elizabeth actually gave a really good presentation about the historic urban landscape recommendation. So I think I can skip some of my first couple of slides. Let's see. Elizabeth also gave a really good description about the 6 steps that has been kind of suggested in the recommendation, and also she mentioned that it could be 6 to 8 steps depending on the local conditions. And another aspect in the recommendation is that within that given context, to develop various tools for civic engagement, to develop knowledge and planning, and for other regulatory purposes, and also financial support. Now, when it comes to the Asia Pacific context, the challenges I see are these. The very first one is the recommendation is generally unknown and also kind of under-recognized. I think Julia did a couple of studies involving different countries, and also found out that this is the kind of condition somewhat across the world. While it is known within some context of the heritage professionals, it's not necessarily known along various municipalities and other government officials. So because of that, there is a lack of training and discussion and awareness building related to the HUL recommendation and its implementation. Uh, because of that, kind of under recognition that the recommendations have across the region, there is this lack of opportunity to share the best practices across the region, to learn from each other. And in general, not having the kind of political leadership and will to take control of rampant urbanization and urban development that impinge upon proper urban conservation is a serious issue in many countries within the region. And as you know, that the countries in the region that do not have the kind of resources, personnel as well as financial resources, and also the kind of processes for implementation of heritage management uh, have also have an impact on developing these contextual approaches to urban conservation based on the HUL recommendations. Um, and as many of you may be familiar with, that most countries have very arcane policymaking processes, and also very kind of old um, preservation policies that need kind of revisiting and revisions to address the current challenges that those cities are having, and these political processes that are somewhat arcane and also inflexible have impact on the implementation of HUL recommendation within those countries. Another issue is the kind of problems with the interagency coordination in these countries. There are different government entities that do not necessarily work together to develop a shared, clearer visions for their cities and towns, um, um, and a shared approaches or strategies for urban development and urban conservation. So these different government entities would have their own interest and visions and their action plans that are not necessarily brought together to develop a singular approach uh, for those cities. Um, Similar to these problems in interagency coordination, there are lack of interdisciplinary cooperation at professional levels. Um, um, Urban planners, architects, heritage professionals would work within their disciplinary silos rather than coming together to discuss how their disciplinary knowledge could be brought together to develop singular approaches and visions for integrated urban development conservation in those towns. One of the critical problem is also not having meaningful ways to get the public and all the stakeholders in a particular location participate in the decision-making process in an integrated urban development and urban conservation approach. Um, Not only that the processes are not available, but also the kind of mindset that needed to have a meaningful public participation is not available too. And as you know, that one of the first steps that the Achiever recommendation mention is that to do a comprehensive mapping of all the natural, cultural, and human resources. So development of that kind of a data management system has been a problem in many locations. In some cities that uh, there could be some level of documentation of the tangible urban fabric. In most of the time, just documentation of street elevations, um, but not necessarily trying to understand the cultural, natural attributes and values in a location. Um, and even when the street elevations are done, the interiors of the buildings are not recorded. So so the changes that may happen in those buildings are never recorded in a particular way, in a useful way. And in some cases of historic towns, trying to implement HUL recommendation may be too late uh, because of the changes to the historic urban fabric uh, maybe too much uh, to to reverse. So in terms of prospects of going forward, what can be done is that there's a greater need uh, for awareness building and capacity building in the implementation of the HUL approach. And Elspeth mentioned in her presentation several steps that have been taken, especially by WITREP and the publication of guidebooks and things like that. Um, so with that comes sharing of the best practices, resources, and tools across the region. The practices, resources, and tools developed by different cities, countries, and those lessons and resources could be shared going forward to help uh, different cities that do not necessarily have the kind of resources to kickstart their processes, so they could at least borrow something from other contexts. There's a critical need of rethinking the heritage governance systems in specific locations, and also the kind of existing top-down decision-making processes in these locations, and to see how to develop a more flexible approaches to handling urban development as well as urban conservation in the particular locations. With that comes developing and also testing different processes for civic engagement in heritage conservation. Um, Depending on the kind of political culture, how fast certain political cultures and mindset would change, these civic engagement approaches may have to be tested to see whether they actually work or not. And with that also comes revisiting heritage legislations and to make necessary changes in the legislative processes and policies to facilitate the kind of recommendation uh, suggested by the HUL recommendation. One of the aspect of the HUL recommendation is the recognition given to the dynamic change in urban heritage values, and notion of authenticity. So within the specific local context, um, the the stakeholders need to understand and decide the kind of acceptable change that could happen in their particular location. Within the heritage, the community of heritage professionals, that there's still a certain level of hesitancy to embrace this idea of dynamic change that could happen in an heritage context. So uh, embracing this idea of change as a part of urban heritage is important in going forward in the implementation of the HUL recommendations. One of the things that could help um, most of the cities and towns that do not have a lot of resources uh, could be to approach the HUL recommendation in an experimental manner, to focus on smaller historic urban areas as a kind of pilot project, and to bring the multiple stakeholders to establish a clear and collective vision for the future of that place. This is again related to what I mentioned in terms of the deficiency in interagency coordination and kind of interdisciplinary coordination among different bodies of professionals. Uh, to develop a clear and a singular vision for a play for that place, and then to develop the kind of tools necessary uh, uh, for implementation of HUL recommendation, and then to go back and assist and review the outcome of that pilot project and make necessary adjustments, learn lessons from it, and then to use those lessons to apply into a different context, a different location. Again, it could be a very small urban area. In some cases, in a larger historic urban area, this approach could happen street by street basis rather than focusing on the entire location. And that level of incremental implementation and refinement, uh, a step-by-step refinement of the approach would be the way to go forward if a particular location do not have the necessary capacities and resources to do so. So that kind of an incremental implementation would allow the optimal use of whatever the limited resources a particular location or a country has. And it lends time to develop necessary capacities, tools, and resources. Um, and also it allows the time to make structural changes to instruments and systems of heritage governance. It provides opportunities to monitor, assess, and modify the policies and actions. Since the approach is a more grounded approach to a very limited area, the outcome would be clearly observable and measurable. Um, and I assume that that kind of an approach would allow a kind of slow philosophical change that needs to happen within the thinking in the heritage governance and the bodies of professionals and the political system in that location. And it will definitely help to develop the kind of context-specific methodology for integrated urban conservation that the HUL recommendation facilitates. So in conclusion, I would say that in the Asia Pacific context, there is a slow but evolving awareness of the HUL recommendation and its value. Uh, uh, it will be very helpful uh, for those locations and the heritage professionals to understand the kind of flexibility that the framework offers, and also the recognition it brings of the dynamic change that needs to happen in an historic urban area, and also its integrated approach to conservation and socioeconomic development, and also its orientation for sustainable development, and also its promotion of developing context specific approaches to integrated conservation and urban planning. So from my point of view, because of that, there is a need for a case-specific incremental implementation of historic urban landscapes approach rather than trying to come up with a policies and systems for the entire country. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Kapila, for this revision about whole implementation and the situation in Asia Pacific. It has been really interesting. Finally, I give the floor to Francesco Bandarin with his presentation, Reshaping Urban Conservation. So Francesco, anytime.
Thank you, Julia. And first of all, let me say how happy I am to see all my old friends, in the same webinar, like Elizabeth, because I know her work, and Julia, we met in Cuenca, in HUL, that city. And Kapila, which of course I never met personally, but we had a lot of exchanges because I wrote an introduction to his presentation, to his very, very fine book on historic urban landscape in Asia, which I strongly recommend, the Routledge handbook actually on that. So it's it's a thick book that really covers a lot of ground, and of course our old friend Vera, and so on. So first of all, let me thank you, congratulate for this webinar, which in a way sets the tone for the rest of the month. As you know, this is the first, or perhaps one of the first of a long series of 24 webinars that we have prepared for this month, which will not only but largely focus on issue of urban policies and urban management. And this is what I would like to talk about. I think it's what I would like to suggest is that, in all the examples that we have seen indicate a very clear direction. In the past 10 years, we have had policies, especially for historic areas or areas that can be regenerated through cultural tools. I would call it a quantum leap. 10 years ago, before HUL, there were of course attempts and this and that, but now the thing is very much organized and structured. My question is, and I will try to show you some examples of this, where we stand with this urban set of urban policies. But my question is, where do we go from now, and how we relate all these new approaches and new achievements and new visions that are so clearly come out of the previous talks and from the literature and from everything we see on the ground. How do we link this to world heritage? Because this is a webinar on our world heritage. We want to somehow see how the convention can be a tool to support a new vision for heritage management, urban heritage management, urban conservation, historic urban landscape promotion as a tool for sustainable development. So I think at the end, I would like to focus on this issue, which, and I advance immediately my conclusions, is far away from being resolved. Now we are really in a very difficult situation in terms of how the convention looks at this very policy that we are discussing. But this our heritage is an organization, a movement, I would say, that has specifically this objective: how to reform the convention. And I think that we should use these opportunities that are offered by this webinar to discuss with a larger group of people, those who attend, those who watch the YouTubes and everything, and those who will see the results of this discussion in our own documents and in the platform that we are going to prepare in 2022 in view of the 50th anniversary of the convention. And we would like to use this important space of discussion and debate to flag some of the big issues that the convention needs to address with the expectations, hope, aspirations of people in the 21st century. Now, let me share my screen. Of course, I have a few slides to show, and I would like to continue my discussion through images that I hope will facilitate the understanding of my points. And I hope really that at the end we will be able also to have a little discussion on this with those who are attending the webinar, but also the organizers, because at the end, you, Vera, you, Monica, you will have to prepare a kind of a paper on the months of discussions, and I would like to stress that this paper has to be a paper that proposes. Oh, I said just ago that we had this quantum leap. Of course, I'm making some schematic assessment, but certainly the historical landscape is a quantum leap. It's something that reforms completely the vision, the approach to urban heritage, and it was done 10 years ago. It was done in 2011. 10 years is a long time. I think it's actually a good time for backward looking and trying to assess the situation. I think both Elizabeth and Capilla and others, including you, Julia, and others, have done this in the past years. We can discuss it. Perhaps we will have to focus specifically on this, and which is not known, because perhaps not everything is. Hello.
Francesco, your audio is a.
Yes, I'm here.
It's not so good.
Sorry,
your audio is not so good.
Not so good. So what do I do?
I have some problems to hear you.
Take your camera. Take your camera off.
Maybe
take your camera.
Okay.
Maybe okay. The connection will be better. That's
I'm
fine.
sorry.
Okay.
Because I'm actually connected through my phone, which is because.
Okay. Let's see now. Yes.
But maybe it's better now. Okay. But anyway, you don't need to see me. You need to see the picture.
No, that's fine. Yeah. Go ahead, please.
Yeah. So I was saying, I don't know if you lost anything, but I was saying that the historical landscape was actually quite an important leap, for this discussion on urban conservation and urban policies. Although I think I would like to have maybe the time at some point with with you also, within even this month to discuss how it really is the situation is after 10 years. But that's not the point for today. For today, we have to see that, in fact, what we are trying to do with this tool is to really, give some practical, first of all, a new vision, and then a practical application, and of course this, simplification of our tools in 4 areas: community engagement, knowledge and planning tools, regulatory system, financial tools, like Elizabeth showed very, very well, was a way to sort of address the need to simplify things. But certainly what's important is the new vision, and the new vision corresponds to a number of new tools that we have to use for implementation. And this is an area of great innovation. 10 years ago, we didn't have many tools that today are available, from digital, tools, impact assessment processes, cultural mapping exercises that will facilitate a lot of the understanding, and will actually make the implementation of the HQL much easier, much more powerful, in terms of its own influence on the planning systems, because at the end HQL has to interact with the planning systems and with the system of financing and bringing resources now to the table. But essentially, what I want to say that HUL has been quite good in sort of identifying these avenues, and I think Elizabeth showed it and Capilla showed it very well. So we have a tool that in a way works, and I think all the practical implementation that we have seen of HUL. And we have collected, I remember one about 30 on a big book that came out about a couple of years ago with Anna Roders. It's called Reshaping Urban Conservation. They show that this thing is flexible enough, open enough, adequate to all different needs as we wanted from the beginning. We didn't want to have a rigid, dogmatic doctrinal tool. We wanted to have something flexible, and this works in many ways that are adapted to different parts of the world. So I think it's been a good way to boost urban conservation within the system of urban planning, urban development, and certainly those who have adapted it and used it are happy with that. So we have a tool. Then we have, during the decade, these other big leaps on urban policies, the Sustainable Development Goals. They're of course very far away from us. They're in the global sphere, the UN, etc. But in the goal 11, for instance, which is the one that deals with making cities inclusive, safe, resilient, and sustainable for culture and heritage are mentioned. And overall, although culture is not there per se, but it permeates the goals, and it's difficult now to see the goals without the Sustainable Development Goals without a cultural dimension and heritage dimension, especially for what concerns built heritage and cities. Then, of course, because this decade is the one where humanity has gone urban. We now everybody's worried about this because a few years from now, 65% up to 70% of the population will be in urban areas. So urban, and this is why Ban Ki-moon so correctly said we will win or lose in urban cities. The challenge of sustainability and environment, and because of this clear trend, irreversible, and I would say also the most dramatic, change in the history of mankind. It's nothing less than that. We are becoming an urban species, and this is something that we have to understand in its full implications. That we had the urban agenda, which I thought was a very, very good way of summarizing, and showing the power and importance of cities in the future of the world. Now, the new urban agenda is a very complex document, and I'm not going to go into it too much, but certainly goes into these pillars, the 4 pillars: the social sustainability, the economic sustainability, environmental sustainability, and the spatial sustainability. So as you can see, it's very articulated, and I would say it's a very detailed, complex tool that allows us to embrace the urban challenge from many sides. We can choose, and even the one that we are interested on, the heritage viewpoint perspective, is fully included there. But these 4 pillars concern everybody. It's not just heritage or urban heritage. It's really the entire process of urban growth, of urban management in the long term. And this is an agenda that will be reviewed only in 2036. So for those of you who will be there, to have a look, this is something that will, have we have like a 20 years distance, in terms of assessment and management. There are a lot of things, and of course we cannot go into detail, but it will be interesting to see all the relationship between this agenda and the areas of concern that we are working on. But certainly, just have a look. See, these are the main policies: the empowerment of marginalized groups, very important. Perhaps something we have not even looked in the HUL. The gender equality issue, the productivity and competitiveness challenge, job creation and livelihoods, the planning for migrants, ethnic minorities, and persons with disabilities, the biodiversity and ecosystem conservation, the climate change mitigation, resilience and adaptation to climate change, and spatial sustainability. And I'm quoting here just a few to show you how, extended, how wide is the challenge that is in front of us. And perhaps also to show that, if we had today to reassess our HUL, we will have to do it, with these policies in consideration, full consideration, because nowadays, today, in this decade and the next decade, this will be the platform that we will have to consider for urban in the field of urban management. HUL perhaps was done before this. So, but again, as we said from the beginning, it's an open tool, and we will be very happy when HUL will be modified because it's not considered a rigid charter or piece of immovable truth, but on the contrary, just an approach that can of course follow and adjust to the times. Now, at that time, we had done a very interesting exercise at UNESCO, trying to fit our cultural policies and heritage policies in this urban agenda, and the result is this set of policies, which I would like to go very quickly through, which are in fact the UNESCO policies for cities. And so in fact, we have a full document that covers this the position of UNESCO and the UNESCO community at large, in the field of urban management, especially with a special attention with historic cities, or even areas that are not really historic but can be influenced in their development through cultural policies. So it's more like a cultural policy kind of thing. We looked at these three areas: policy for people, policy for the environment, policy for the management and governance of cities. And we just very quickly on through them. We had the four policies for people, which I'm going to go one by one, but quickly. Which were all aimed to building on the power of culture to promote human and inclusive cities. Of course, the most important one was human-centered city, and this is something that we really, we needed to stress more and more, because in a way, urban planning and even historic urban planning and or planning for historic cities has forgot a little bit this dimension, and the convention. It's an evidence of this. The convention never speaks about people in historic cities. Always talks about the physical environment, but not the social or cultural environment of a city. So it's important to focus on that. I singled out a few things like for instance, this statement: people and their well-being should be at the center of local development initiative to achieve sustainable cities and fulfill human aspiration. In this research, we've done huge amount of demonstrations, trying to find examples. So I cannot go into there over 100 examples, but certainly some of them are interesting to see. For instance, in this case, that case of this kind of human-centered city, we had a good example in Luang Prabang, where jointly with the restoration of the city, which was promoted by UNESCO France, the French Cities Association, the Agence France for Development, for the French Agency for Development. But jointly with this, they created a large amount of public spaces that were in fact aimed to give the people the possibility of using in a very flexible, dynamic way, because I saw it. It's it's a multiple use kind of space, but it was conceived as such, and it worked very well in order as an integrator of different communities that could use the same place, the same spaces in ways that made it much more integrated as a social life. Inclusivity, of course, something so important, because that's one of the risks of managing urban historic areas, is to create exclusivity. We know very well what we mean, because we see it all the time. Historic cities are essentially a place that becomes either gentrified or destined to the tourist industry. So it's essentially exclusive, exclusionary. So making it inclusive is so important. And we had many cases. Of course, this one is the one in Durban was a way to target discrimination and empowering marginalized groups to reappropriate the cities by providing communities with equipments and in order to foster their initiatives. This issue of peace, of course, sometimes seems a little bit too much, but essentially have creating tolerant societies, societies that can interact with different cultures, but for this we need to at the same time safeguard the identities of all the residents and respect the identities of all the residents, and then ensure that the people feel safe and the spaces are the public spaces, the shared spaces are safe. You probably remember this super famous case of Medellin, in Colombia, which was one of the most violent cities in the world, and thanks to a very enlightened policy, culture-based policy, of creating opportunities for youth, opening up cultural spaces and sports, and so on. In the matter of a few years, the homicide rate of this most violent place on earth, precipitated, dropped by 80%. So it was a very, very important demonstration that you can actually do a very effective management of a city through cultural policies. Innovation, creativity and innovation, which of course permeate our economies, but they could find in historic areas a very, very important area for expansion, and of course with specific uses and specific applications. And so digital technology is welcome in the management and promotion of historic cities. I was looking at this Sao Paulo and Curitiba in Brazil. You will tell me there if it's really working, but we thought it was a good idea to have a mobile app that uses essentially the social networking as a tool to foster transparency and collaboration in city management. So citizens can be called to participate and give their own thing through an app. It's very interesting to see how this can innovate in public resource management. Then we had to improve the quality of the built and natural environment through culture and human scale and compact cities. Because we think that urban heritage can contribute to sustainable development through many strategies. The historic city normally has this compactness and low energy, because it was created in a moment of lower energy, and that allows a lot of it's really like an open book for this kind of policies. And in fact, in many cities, this urban regeneration has been promoted to really foster, some very old and difficult problems, especially in the case of Johannesburg, for instance. That I'm showing now for the apartheid and the post-apartheid was still a big problem in urban development. But this idea was very strong, and it was operational through specific projects, aiming really at enhancing the cultural significance of areas. Sustainable, resilient, green cities. We always talk about that. How this reflects in a cultural or heritage environment. Something to see. Implement actions to harness cultural role in sustainable, resilient green cities. We had this interesting case, for instance, in Tajikistan, where this city was completely ruined by bad management. But the creation of a public space through the Aga Khan program created a very, very important pole of renaissance of the city. And it's not the only case. I know many others, like in India, for instance, in Delhi or in Lahore now, where the Aga Khan is operating, or the famous Al Azhar Park, of course, in Cairo, that have been really poles of regeneration of the city. Public spaces are very important. In fact, they are quite at the core of the urban agenda. If you read the urban agenda, there are a number of recommendations on this, because the public space is, where the public management of a city, the governance of a city, can best express, its own direction, more than on private spaces. And of course, the upgrading of public space is such an important, pillar for urban regeneration, for management, for even creating spaces of dialogue and reconciliation. certain areas. Like this is the case of very famous case of Marrakesh, where they have this fantastic Jumna al-Fna square, which is an historical square where, you know, there are multiple uses and essentially all the city gravitates around this space. But, you know, now this thing is threatened because tourism is somehow taking over the ground with respect to traditional uses. So there is even an issue of protecting existing public spaces that already have demonstrated their capacity to perform, you know, you know, their function as social integrators and from changes that come from outside. The identity of urban identity is very, very important. Of course, it's a key, especially in historic areas. And I know we had a case earlier on. Elizabeth spoke about Ballarat. I think it's one of these very, very significant cases of application of HUL, you know, and perhaps you know, made famous the city around the world, the use of HUL. But certainly, you know, they really were use this new tool to really focus on their own identity and bring it back, bring it forward, and somehow give, you know, not only pride to the citizen, but also really as a tool for, you know, enhancing their local resources. And then finally, the integration of culture in urban policies to foster sustainable development. Rehumanization of urban areas. This is a, you know, very interesting case that I know very well, is Pekalongan in Indonesia, which is the motherland of batik. But, you know, batik was considered like a secondary use, secondary activity in the city, until the government understood that this was the key. So in fact, invested everything on batik, and this now is the world capital. So this enormous industry, which is the production of batik, and it's becoming not only a city identity, but also a city livelihood, because it has really been, you know, brought up to a very, very important, by the way, it's in the intangible heritage list as well, as a very important tradition that ennobles the city, not just downgrades it. Small settlements, we never forget that. The villages are an important dimension in cultural policies and urban policies. We will have to come back on this because it's too important to just treat. But this is a case, for instance, a very important case near Delhi. You know, you have this village that has, you know, very important archaeological resources, and they have understood that that is their future. So they have built all the policies for the conservation of their village and their archaeological resources around that thing. And also, it's a way in which, you know, a demonstration how heritage can become, you know, a pole focus, you know, of sustainable development. And urban governance, of course, is something without saying. Everything runs around the governance. This is a case of Kyoto, which has a very interesting, you know, attention to not only its physical conservation, but also in the way in which the communities, you know, interact with them among themselves, and how they actually use the historical frameworks and historical areas, you know, as part of their daily life. And finally, the financing, which of course we can talk forever, but financing is so important, and culture should be brought back, you know, to a more central role on this. We have, for instance, this case on Hoi An, you know, where in fact, which is in Vietnam, where, you know, there was a policy to reuse all the tourist revenues to benefit the local population, and, you know, they have created 10,000 jobs in this small city near Hanoi, which is, you know, of course, a very important city, but, you know, the citizens directly benefit. So I'm just stopping here because I think we can go very far. But now, what I would like to summarize is this following. So we have a lot of, you know, new positions, new demonstrations, new case studies, I mean, urban policies have changed dramatically in the past 10 years. One thing that is perhaps still needs to be done is to adjourn the World Heritage Convention on this. And we need it, because the World Heritage Convention is not only a convention for the preservation of a certain number of important sites. It is a beacon. It's the guidance, is the tool that people look at for inspiration when they have to develop policies. You know, many countries even develop their own legislation around the World Heritage Convention. Many cities develop and sites develop their strategies for conservation around the World Heritage Convention. So being in the World Heritage Convention with these ideas, with this new, say, package that has come up in the past 10 years is fundamental. But we're not there. This is the convention. Article 1. What is a city in the convention? It's groups of buildings. Now, you will probably be horrified, as I am and have been for the past 20 years, that this definition is still there. If you are presenting, if a country is presenting a city, historic city for inscription, or part of a city for inscription on the World Heritage Convention, today, 2021, you will have to say this site is a group of buildings. It's something unbelievable. We are, in a Jurassic sphere in terms of, the convention operates in a Jurassic era as compared to where we stand today. And I've, quickly gone through the development of this policy. Groups of separate or connected buildings, which, because of their architecture, their homogeneity, or their place in the landscape, are of the standing universal value from the point of view of history, art, or science. Now, please notice the total absence of a society here. There's nothing. It's only art history and perhaps or history, but there's no people there here. So we have a city which is defined as essentially an ensemble of buildings. I've never seen a city defined as such, and a city without people. This is today the World Heritage Convention. I make a point that this thing should be reformed through the only tool that is available, which is the operational guidelines. The operational guidelines have made a little bit more in terms in this direction because they talk about cities. But this, I would like to show you what is today the conception of cities in the operational guideline. Groups of urban buildings eligible for inscription on the World Heritage List fall into 3 categories, namely towns which are no longer inhabited, first century archaeology, historic towns which are still inhabited, thank you, and new towns of the 20th century. Let's focus on this last one because it's quite ridiculous, and which new towns on the 20th century, which paradoxically have something in common with both the aforementioned categories. While their original urban organization is clearly recognizable and their authenticity is undeniable, their future is unclear because their development is largely uncontrollable. Now, I'd like to share with you my judgment. This is, a shame it's a shame that a text like this is still in the official operational guidelines of the World Heritage Convention. I cannot imagine why and how, serious people like the World Heritage Center, the advisory bodies, ICROM, allow this thing to be still there because it's something that is shameful, okay, and totally useless. So I think we are promoting also the elimination. Better to cancel this Annex 3 altogether than have text that is so ridiculous and totally out of any of its own sphere, and it's completely useless, by the way. Now we have this year the 10th anniversary of the convention, or the HUL. It's a good opportunity because in a few days UNESCO will celebrate the HUL anniversary. I hope that this will be the focus of this discussion. I hope, I'm not sure, but I hope that the focus of the discussion will be how to reform the convention so that the HUL is given a proper place. And this document, which is a UNESCO recommendation, becomes the inspirational document for the way in which the World Heritage Convention deals and treats historic cities. If they don't look at this thing, if this document, if this event is just to celebrate the greatness of HUL, it will be useless. It will not serve any purpose. I hope, therefore, that this will be the focus of it. That they will ask, the mayors, they will ask specialists, they will ask member states to please rally together and come with a change in the World Heritage Convention and its operational guidelines as soon as possible, because we are late and we lost 10 years already. So it's not 10 years that we gained, we lost 10 years in this case. And so that we can advance and bring the convention to the 21st century. Thank you very much for your attention.
Well, thank you very much, Francesco. That was really inspiring. So now it's time for the debate. But first of all, I would like to highlight a few of the ideas of our speakers before to give the floor to the audience. I would like to highlight this idea from the lecture of Elizabeth when she said SDG is our local response to a global movement. No, I think this is very important, this idea, because with this idea, the adaptive reuse is like the main trend to develop. No, so for me this idea was very clear. No, later, regarding Kapila in Asia is where there are more papers about the whole implementation. I did a review with Ana Pereira, and the main results was confirmed the many cases in Asia. So really, we were very impressed about this commitment from the academy in order to know how to implement the whole recommendation. No? So the results were amazing. So at the end, many cases, many questions, and many challenges. No, so your lecture was amazing in that sense. No, regarding the lecture from Francesco, I would like to highlight two ideas. No, so there is a problem from now to 2050. The population is going to grow from now, and we don't know if our cities will be ready to accommodate this entire population. So, and the big question is, how will this affect our way of life, our well-being, and our heritage? No, this is like the main question. No, I would like to launch other question for other moment. Is what is more sustainable than reusing our urban resource? Because also we also contribute to consolidating our urban culture, our roots, our identity, our diversity. So what is more sustainable than reusing our urban resource? No, it's also is the main idea that I usually discuss with my students. No, so I hope there will be here some of them, because tomorrow we will talk about this in class. So only to apport or to give you some ideas, and later after the question from the audience, maybe we can talk also about this idea. No, so first let's see if there is some question for the audience. Well, here Milena to Francesco, the big question. Do you think the consideration of integrity, especially visual integrity, can be a key point to face some of the challenge in the whole approach?
Well, of course, thank you for the question. But we use the word landscape exactly, with reference to also a visual balance, visual integrity. Now, visual integrity is a difficult term, and I understand that there's been a lot of discussion on this, and so far, we have been able to, at least in the convention, maybe outside is a little better, but in the convention, essentially to limit it to visual axes, something that really is. I must say that the fact of putting a lot of emphasis on the setting, the context, and the things that are outside of the site properly concealed, the buffer zone, the core zone, has created a lot of interesting results. Because in some cases, cities or countries say, well, no, this is our zone, and outside is not your business. But in most cases, they don't say that. They really are concerned with the impacts that come from outside. In a way, it's a mixture of, in effect, it comes a little bit from the culture of HUL, because there is a kind of a common shared culture, and a little bit also from the natural heritage. Because natural heritage is the type of heritage that says, there are a lot of impacts that come from outside of the thing. It can be climatic impact or any sort. So in fact, the idea that there are impacts that come from outside the core zone of a heritage site is has taken ground. I think it's a good point. So certainly visual integrity is one of the pillars of HQL, and certainly is one of the great way of presenting it to also to the public.
The rest of the speakers would like to add something?
Maybe if I could respond to that as well. To me, visual integrity is key to obviously the ongoing protection of the culture of a city. And it's much more fiercely guarded, of course, in World Heritage cities. But I think what we're finding in cities without that international recognition that may have their own culture, but only local protection, if you like, that the conflicting objectives in our society of, for example, post-COVID employment generation conflicts so much, can conflict. For example, the emphasis on infrastructure projects, roads, incredible emphasis on short-term fix with jobs, build roads, instead of maintaining an existing streetscape and context and looking at alternatives of how you move people around and how you generate jobs in other more socially sustainable outcomes, such as housing for the poor, low-income housing. And what I'm finding a real challenge in our country, in Australia, is that post-COVID, we are internationally, economically doing very well. But at the same time, we have these policies, these economic stimulus policies, which are heavily impacting on our visual integrity of our cities. It's essentially development at any cost. And a lot of it is redevelopment, which of course, in relation to the Sdgs, is counterproductive because we are losing the embedded energy of existing buildings, which all contribute to our visual integrity of the history of our cities. So I think the discussion of visual identity and integrity is in a different category when you're talking about World Heritage inscribed cities versus cities, and there's so many of them around the world, which are recognized as important in the local context, but don't have that international scrutiny that World Heritage cities have. So I think there's really competing objectives in relation to the issue of visual integrity.
Okay, thank you very much, Elizabeth. And Kapila, would you like to add some comments?
Sure. One of the problem of the visual integrity is that in the name of conservation or trying to maintain an historic character in an environment, that to what extent we allow the change of the visual environment or the physical environment to create some kind of a fake historic character. Just for the name of maintaining an historic authenticity of architecture, the spirit of place, or the visual character of the place, and also to create some kind of an environment for tourism. There is this risk of kind of recreating or cleaning up the historic place to create a historic character. That is also there as a problem, and especially it's a problem in historic places that are more geared towards tourism as the kind of main economic generator for that place.
Thank you. I think the key is, what do we understand? How is visual integrity? No? Is only a static view, or how is the landscape? No, it's full of different information, different layers. So how to manage the visual integrity? No, it's a very complicated question that maybe the action plan can be helped to resolve. No, so everything depends on what do we understand as visual integrity.
But Julia, if I can, sometimes visual integrity is embodied in the building or in a setting, and also relationship, visual relationship are defined in the design process, and therefore it's relatively easy to identify. Other times, they are created. They're cultural product. They're essentially something that people want to maintain, because it becomes part of the heritage. So I think it's it's a relatively, say, adjustable, flexible concept, like everything in heritage. There's nothing fixed, but really has to come from the bottom. I think that if we rely only on top-down, visual integrity definitions, then we never get anywhere, because we only get, art historian, architecture historian, or that tell you that this doesn't go anywhere, and doesn't go anywhere because the political processes happen anyway. So if the only way to manage political processes, which are decisive in terms of protecting real integrity, is to have a bottom-up approach. So people say, listen, we want to preserve that kind of thing. So I think there's a lot of work to do there, but it's in the historical landscape you have all the tools, so because it's a combination of top-down, bottom-up kind of thing. Then we have a case of London, which is the most catastrophic on earth, because London was the first city that established a visual integrity policy. Even before we existed, it was to protect St. Paul's, the image of the cathedral, which is a very prominent building in London, and they passed a law to protect St. Paul's, so nothing could. But if you look today, St. Paul's is surrounded by tall buildings. Is it really not? So even the laws for protection, so very top-down kind of thing, have not worked. Just a case. I wanted to make cite an important case. Okay.
Yeah, and I think what Monica's just put up about visual integrity is just one of the aspects of landscapes, and I'd say cultural landscapes. And obviously, cultural landscapes are far beyond the visual attributes. And I think the benefits of what we saw, the case studies that Francesco showed us through the New Urban Agenda publication. I think that was the source. Was it, Francesco? What was
it was actually our publication, the UNESCO publication, Culture Urban Future.
Okay. I think the thing that was so great about the case studies was the broad-ranging issue of not just visual integrity, but cultural integrity, about the importance of culture, and the whole issue about the case studies talking about public spaces, greening, healthy cities, creativity, employment. And I think all of those things are the kind of issues that we are able, in the flexibility of a whole framework, to include. And there is a question here from Milana Torres de Melo Silva, thank you, which asks, what was missing from the critical 6 steps of Hull? And I think it's not so much what, I mean, in the Fukuoka meeting and the Japanese meeting, there was an important final point which talked about capacity reinforcement. This is under the revised steps for implementation. And I think it's important, and we've talked about the issue of resourcing what it is that we're trying to do in cities, and making sure that we have policies that direct resources to achieving the cultural authenticity, the livability and so forth of our cities. So that was an important one that was missing, this capacity reinforcement. And then also the other steps that were sort of identified as slightly missing was that at the start of looking at your city, if you're going to use Hull as a model, it's so important to understand what works in your governance structure and what doesn't work. So that was really just to answer a question as briefly as I could from one of the participants. Thank you for that question. That was Milena Torres. Thank you.
Could I add one more thing to that? I'm not really sure whether this is a step that is needed or whether this is a tool. Something that I see in the Asia Pacific context is that how to bridge or how to connect and how to think about in a more integrated manner the tangible heritage and the intangible heritage when it comes to urban historic urban landscapes. Naturally, the the step is to look into the kind of tangible heritage in the historic urban landscape, and to see the intangible heritage as a kind of something different from it, something separated from it. So how to develop policies in unison for both type of heritages is an important aspect. So I'm not sure whether it's a part of the tools to be developed, or for the whether it is a specific step, or is it a sub step of one of the steps.
Yeah. And I think they're flexible and they can be localized and developed really in whatever way that you want to. But I think the key point, and it's like our borough charter approach, is that make sure that you understand what the values are of your place comprehensively before you start taking the actions, because they will generate your policies and your projects and your actions, that understanding.
Yeah.
Francesco, would you
Yeah.
like to add something?
Yeah, no, I just want to, maybe there is a new question there by Carlos John, who is interesting, and which is interesting, and maybe you want to pass to that one. He asked for how to measure the impact of HOL transformation in social identity of the inhabitant, not inhabitant. And of course, we mentioned Yuka, a very good friend, and suggest you study the book, my book. Yes, thank you. And I would like to understand it. Now, let me say, this is a complex issue, and I think that some of the people that are here in this webinar are more qualified than me, starting with Julia. Julia has done a lot of work, field work on this, and also perhaps you can give us some ideas. And also Elizabeth, I'm sure, and perhaps, because I'm more on the policy than work, less on the ground. You are more on the ground. But in my view, there are two ways of measuring this relationship between on social identity. First is on the process. So the process of HOL takes a long time. It's like a year of work, something like this. And during this process, the thing you have to do is to mobilize the population and to somehow create a very active participatory framework. Now, the success of this participatory framework is a very good indication of the impact on the social identity of the process. If you have very few people coming, people don't care, of course it doesn't work. If you have, on the contrary, it becomes like a global urban affair, everybody's involved and people come and so on, and it becomes a very lively debate, then I think it's much more. So I think I will look at first at this element, the preparation of the thing, because it is a very interactive preparation. The second one is the way in which people use the city identity in their own thing, because many people may not participate to the planning process, but then when they open a shop, they put up their city identity up front, because it's part of the way in which they want to project the image. So I will look at the way in which people use the identity of the city for many purposes. Some could be economic, some could be social, even political. So there are different ways in which you can collect information about these things. But I'm sure that Julia and Elizabeth had more to say about that than me.
Well, in my experience, I implement the whole recommendation in Ecuador, in Cuenca, and also in a small town in a region in Extremadura, in a very septentrional area in Spain. The most difficult was, as Francesco said, involve the citizens. This was the most difficult, but later, when they were involved and they were inside all the process, they were the absolute protagonist. Most of them were women, men. This was the big problem. I don't know why, but the men never wanting to involve. But at the end, the most difficult was first involve the citizen, and later put together to discuss the municipality with the citizen, because the technicians or the university more or less were in the middle, trying to put together, trying to achieve a consensus, but it was a bit difficult. And of course, it was very, very, very difficult to establish a relationship between the heritage necessities from the citizen perspective and with the current regulatory systems. Very, very difficult. The planning, the system of planning, at least in Ecuador or in Spain, they don't think, or they don't solve the incorporation of the heritage necessity in our planning system. So this is very difficult, because at the end you have to remove, or you have to change our regulatory system. So this takes a lot of time. So this, but at the end, you can do a document as we did, with a lot of information from the different perspectives, from the city, from the citizens, from the municipality, and from the technicians. At the end, you have a document with a lot of measures, or with a lot of actions to implement in the city from this point of view. So the need is, the thing is, maybe in some municipalities, they don't have the tools to implement these kind of measures. That was the main difficulty. For this reason, the plan, the action plan is, for me, it's perfect. In Ecuador and in Spain, when we implemented, the first is mapping everything, no, resource, cultural, human, and natural. Later, reach a consensus. The third, have identify the vulnerabilities. Later, put together all this information in a strategic plan. Later, prioritize, no, and lastly, establish partnerships. For me, the 6 steps are perfect. The thing is, there are a lot of actors or stakeholders, and you have to put together to work. And sometimes it's easy, and sometimes it's difficult. But I agree with the 6 steps.
Interesting. And I think a point that I made at the end of my presentation is so much the importance of having champions, local champions, people who can engage and enthuse. And it can be exhausting. People get exhausted through this process of trying to make something better. And inevitably it falls on a handful of people to be the champions, and then they have to enroll other people in their vision for what they want. So it has to sort of spread out.
For them, it's very inspiring. For them, it's very, very inspiring, and have a lot of strength for them.
Yeah, and there is a question in here: what's a good way to get local governments that are reluctant to engage with heritage on board with approaches like the Hull? And this is very much related to what you're talking about, Julia, about just the issue about partnerships and inspiring people, and those 6 steps do outline that process. But to me, it's so much the importance of the individuals who are inspiring others to become involved, and then it takes off from them. And it takes time. It takes time. It does take time, but it's worth it. It's worth it. And as you're describing. So in relation to the question about reluctant, local governments who aren't interested, don't think it's worthwhile, it is this issue about what can the city benefit? How can from the city benefit? You need to sell it in a way that they're going to get some kind of champion status by using this initiative. It's all about positioning and advocacy for the city, and what are the benefits that will accrue from applying this recommendation. And that can be difficult to persuade people. And that's why sharing of other people's examples can be very helpful.
Yes, I think there is no more question. No, I was reviewing, and I think the last is that. No, I was advisory in the municipality, and there were no laws for whole conservation in urban planning. No, so this is the question that we were talking about. No, this is the main difficult. So the thing is, when we did the project in Cuenca, that the mayor in that moment supported us during all the process. The thing is, when we finished the project, the mayor was changed, and the new mayor said, "I'm not interested in that project, so this is not my problem." So this is other problem, because in case you have the support, if the mayor is changed, you are totally alone. So we have to think in other tools that is more transversal to the political situation, because at the end, the main conclusion that I obtained was without municipality, the whole is impossible to implement. You need the municipality. You alone as university or citizen is no sense. You need the municipality.
Yes, and you do need those policies which you say you wrote down as a document that gets adopted and endorsed. So important, because the mayor might change, but if they are by then municipality policies, it's a bit harder to change them because they've become embedded in the process. Of course they can be, and that's what politics does.
Yeah.
It can change things.
But Elizabeth, this is how I am so worried about the fact that the convention doesn't recognize these principles, because the convention could actually be a game changer. Because if these principles are recognized, embodied in the convention, recommended in the operational guideline, but things will flow. Things will flow. I think the biggest problem of HUL has been in the past 10 years that not to go through this to become an official policy of the convention. It is an official policy of UNESCO, but not recognized by the convention. And my question is why?
Yeah.
And I don't have all the answers, but why this has not changed? I've tried that many times. I was there. I would try many times, and I got desperate about that. But why this is not changing is a big question, and perhaps with Vera and Monica, we'll have to discuss more on that. Because if we don't understand why there is so much resistance in the member states, the advisory bodies, everybody to change this meaning of historic heritage, of historic urban heritage in the convention, we miss something. Perhaps the convention sees itself as a kind of a immobile. They're afraid of changes. Well, I'm not completely convinced of this, because the convention has been innovative in many fronts. They think about the operational, the cultural landscapes, think about the introduction of many new concepts of heritage, like itineraries or scientific heritage or many things. So there's been a dynamic, but in terms of the way in which the concept is managed, they are extremely backward. It's something unbelievable for me and for all those who are working on this in this area. That the convention is content with definitions that are really 100 years old, and in no way represent and reflect the modern approach to urban heritage.
And what you're asking for in the convention is reference to the Hull recommendation as well. Is that right? As well as revising.
I think. Look, the convention is untouchable because you cannot change the convention, but you can change the operational guidelines. And the operational guidelines are a way to sort of update and correct or redirection the convention. So yes, I would like the operational guidelines to have a chapter in which it says the principles of HUL are to be applied for the management of World Heritage cities. This is so simple. And then if they want, there will be a legion of people, starting with Julia and everybody, that would provide them with the methodology. We can write texts that are not only more, say, adapt to the current challenges, but also will take away those shameful texts that exist today, which are really something unbelievable. Whenever I read, I say, whoever has written this thing? I mean, and why the convention?
What is blocking this?
That's my question from me. Why is not changing? Well, changing the convention and adapting the convention has always been a long process, but 10 years is a long process. So why has not happened?
Yeah, but you're saying you can make it easy by doing the operational guidelines. Leave the convention.
Sure.
So what's in the way of doing that?
We organized several times working groups during the committee to proceed to these changes. For some reason, And I even think that the ICOMOS was not so pushing. The ICOMOS was not very interested in this change. Not ICOMOS as such, as an organization, which is very modern, advanced, but perhaps the group that deals with this thing was afraid of the World Heritage team was afraid of bringing change. But this marries with in the interest of many member states not to change anything in this respect, because changing the way in which a city is conceived, managed, preserved, it has political implications, has many political implications. So now they're afraid of this because that could then become a nuisance and for mayors, for ministers, and so on. So I think there is a political blockage because of that. Of course, the states that have approved the HQI recommendation are the same ones that are members of the convention, but this shows the complete schizophrenia that exists in this thing.
Yeah, could this be one of the goals of the 10-year anniversary, that you get this kind of recommendation?
I hope so. I hope so.
Yeah.
But I hope so. But I'm not sure that the Secretariat is doing this. I will listen to this. They're not invited. We're not invited, of course, no. But to be part of this celebration. But I will listen to them because I want to understand whether this is just to say, okay, let's have a glass of champagne, or excuse me, we have a problem. I hope they realize that we do have a problem. They do have a problem because if they go on like this, UNESCO goes on like this, it loses credibility. Who believes in a convention that talks about cities as groups of buildings? Excuse me. So there is an issue of credibility. And what I'm surprised that this thing has not been sufficient to bring upon a change of the thing, which I don't think will change, will be a revolution, will be an adaptation of the convention to the modern world, which has been done already in the past. So I hope in the new direction of ICOMOS, because these are good friends and good people, especially the new Secretary General, Mario Santana, the new President, Teresa Patricia, and so on, and people, and the Treasurer, Patricia, Jerome, Pamela Jerome. So, these are people that know what we're talking about. And I hope that they will take this issue in their arms and somehow bring it forward. And it has to break some glasses. It has to break some ceilings. We have to have some alliance in the member states, which is very difficult, because they never want to have problems with the other member states, so they don't take issues that are controversial. But we need to have these kind of things. When a very important person like Jad Tabet was part of the committee because he was the representative of Lebanon, things advanced very fast because you just need one person that has the capacity and the skills now to somehow bring the truth to the forefront. But we are an organization. We're an organization, Oral Heritage, that has this scope, precise scope. Change the convention.
This is the real challenge, real challenge. So I remember I had a meeting with the municipality to focus our future master plan from the perspective of whole approach. And they said, sorry, the city is managed in completely separate departments. This is impossible. Put together environment, heritage, mobility, security. How to do it? I explain other cases. It's like the sailing, no?
Glass ceiling.
Put together this. No. The city is managed in completely separate departments. So
Julia, you're saying that you're essentially a victim of HUL.
Absolutely, absolutely.
Okay.
At the end, I usually do with my students, with other disciplines, because in the academic area we can try different experiments, but the real thing is I would like to implement not in Seville, because Seville is a huge intermediate city, but at least in some neighborhood or something similar. But the main thing that I have to do is to convince the mayor or the officers. This is the main challenge.
Okay. All right.
And there is one more question, which which was asked of me, but generally to people too, about the challenges. What challenges do you see in terms of adaptive reuse of historic buildings, and how can make this process more attractive to stakeholders? Did the panel want to discuss that? I'm happy to quickly say a few words about that.
Yeah, I think we only have 1 minute.
I do think that there are challenges. Oh, 1 minute. Okay.
Yeah, 2 minutes, because there's another webinar.
So where is that question regarding the adaptive reuse? I am looking
from the Daniela panelists. It was and anyway, of course, yes, there are challenges. One of the key things I reckon gets back to this issue about sustainability and this notion of embedded energy in existing buildings, which is not measured in Green Star rating. So that if you say you've got a 6-star rating new building, but you've pulled down an old building, you haven't measured the damage that you've done by all the removal of the embedded energy and then putting it in landfill. So the whole equations for measuring the star rating, I think, is a key problem at the moment, certainly in our country, about adaptive reuse. And then, of course, the skills, people who know how to do it well and those who don't know how to do it well. So again, it's skills training issue, but it's something that I'm passionate about because I think it's a very important part of what architects, of course, do a lot more in Europe than they do in the newer worlds, but it's very important to ensure that that's part of a city's process, adaptively reusing, because it's the greenest building is the existing building.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, sorry, but I think we have to finish because they are advising me, warning me. So I don't know if there are more questions. I don't think so. This session has been very, very interesting, very inspiring and challenging. So I would like to thank all the speakers, Elizabeth, Capilla, and Francesco. We have a lot of challenge from now to, I don't know. Thank you very much for everything. I think, Monica, we have to finish, no?
Yes, I just want to thank you very much for all the very interesting and inspiring presentations, and also for the inputs of all those aspects that we have to deal with. So thank you very much. And I would like also to invite you and the audience to check out today's sessions 5 and 6, and also tomorrow's session 7, and the project exhibition that we will have tomorrow. And if people did not register yet, please register at our website, our World Heritage website. Thank you very, very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.